They say some houses hold stories in their walls, but sometimes it's the quiet ones, the almost forgotten homes at the end of a dirt road, that echo the loudest. In the hills just outside Millersville, there stood a small weather-beaten farmhouse with a chip blue mailbox and a rusted wind chime that never quite stopped spinning. It was the kind of place that had long stopped expecting miracles, until one came knocking, carrying a suitcase, a little girl, and a secret too heavy for one heart alone. If stories like this move something deep inside you, take a second to subscribe. We bring you soul-deep stories like this every day. Now lean in. This one unfolds slowly, and it doesn't let go. Caleb Hart had lived alone since the year the leaves didn't turn. That's how he remembered it. Autumn had come too fast that year, shriveled and brown before the colors could even flame. Just like his marriage, just like his plans. The house had once rung with laughter, his wife's, his daughter Molly's, even the dog's. But that had been 3 winters and 1 too many silences ago. By now, Caleb's life was clockwork. Feed the chickens, fix the fence that didn't want fixing, brew coffee in a dented percolator that hissed like it held grudges. He liked the quiet, or he said he did. It made grief easier to ignore when it had no competition. That morning had started like any other. Mist lifting off the fields, the porch boards groaning like old bones under his boots. But when he turned the corner with a basket of cracked corn for the hens, he saw them. A woman in a beige coat 2 sizes too big, and a child wrapped in a pink blanket, one wheel of her chair caught in the gravel. Caleb froze. They looked like they didn't belong to the day, like they had stepped out of a story and into his yard. The woman looked up. Her eyes held that defensive calm people wear when they've already decided they won't beg. The girl's legs were covered, unmoving, but her hands clutched a sketchbook, so tightly it looked like it held her spine up. "We just need a place until morning," the woman said. They didn't ask for more. And Caleb, despite every bone in his body that had learned not to get attached, found himself stepping forward. Maybe it was the way the little girl blinked at the sun, like it had just remembered her name. Or maybe it was because the house had felt hollow for too long. They stayed one night, then another. Then Caleb fixed the ramp that had collapsed years ago. Then the squeaky hinge on the guest room door. Then the girl, Sophie, started drawing apples from a tree out back. And slowly, quietly, something began to shift, like warmth returning to fingertips after frost. Her mother, Delia, said little at first. She cooked like someone trying not to leave a trace, ate quietly, cleaned everything twice. But it was in the way she tucked Sophie's hair behind her ear, the way her fingers trembled when she thought no one was looking. She hadn't left because she wanted to. That much Caleb understood. Sophie, though, was sunlight with a spine. She laughed without sound sometimes, like the joy was too big for her throat. She drew constantly. The porch swing, Caleb's boots, a cloud that looked like a spoon. And one afternoon, she asked Caleb why the tree in the backyard never bloomed. He didn't know how to answer. The tree had stopped blooming the year Molly died. Maybe out of grief. Maybe in protest. He'd always said it was just old. But now, with Sophie asking, he saw the way its limbs still reached. Days turned to weeks. The rhythm of the house changed. Delia started humming when she thought no one was listening. Caleb started making breakfast for 3 without thinking. Sophie drew a picture of the 3 of them beneath the tree. She didn't call it a family. She didn't have to. But the past doesn't stay buried just because you stop digging. One morning, a black car rolled up the driveway. Out stepped a man with a haircut that cost more than Caleb's entire Sunday wardrobe. He smiled the way wolves did, said he was Delia's husband, said he had rights. Delia went still. Sophie curled into herself like she had practice. Caleb stood between them and didn't flinch. The man had paperwork, claims, threats, but what he didn't have was a single ounce of grace. Delia didn't speak while he was there. Only afterward, in the soft light of the kitchen, did she whisper that she left in the night after he tried to silence Sophie. Not just her voice, but her whole self. Caleb listened. Then he walked out back and stared at the tree for a long time. The next day, he drove to town, talked to people he hadn't spoken to in years. Lawyers, advocates, asked questions he didn't know how to spell. And when he came back, he sat Delia down and said, "You don't owe me anything, but if you want to stay, we'll fight this." She nodded, then cried, then nodded again. What followed wasn't easy. Court dates, accusations, days when Sophie stopped drawing, nights when Delia couldn't sleep. But through it all, Caleb stayed. He built a taller fence, painted the porch, learned to make pancakes shaped like stars because Sophie said the round ones felt boring. And then came the verdict. Sole custody awarded to Delia, a restraining order granted, freedom signed and sealed. They celebrated under the tree with lemonade and burned toast. Sophie drew a picture of Caleb holding a garden hose like a sword. The next morning, the tree bloomed. No one believed it at first. Caleb stepped outside with his coffee and stood still. So long the rooster got nervous. White blossoms, soft as cotton, covered every limb. It was like the tree had been waiting for something, or someone, maybe 3 someones. Delia laughed when she saw it. Real laughter, full and round, like wind chimes in summer. Sophie drew it, of course. Drew the tree, the house, the swing Caleb finally fixed. She drew herself in the tree's arms. Life didn't become perfect, but it became true, honest. Daily miracles, Delia called them, like the way Sophie started singing again, like the way Caleb learned to dance in the kitchen without spilling coffee, like the time a dog wandered into the yard and just stayed. He had 3 legs and 1 good ear, and Sophie named him Miracle. And then one night, as spring turned to summer, Delia brought Caleb a letter from her doctor, a positive result. Not illness, life. She was pregnant. Caleb sat down without meaning to. Delia watched him like a question waiting to be answered. He smiled, just a little, then looked out the window at the tree, still in bloom. That was the night he proposed. No ring, just words, just truth. She said yes with her whole heart. They married under that tree. Sophie rolled down the aisle with Miracle trotting beside her. The neighbors brought pies and folding chairs. Someone played an old fiddle, and as the sun set, Caleb looked around and realized his house no longer echoed. It sang. But stories like this never end where you think. 2 months later, a letter arrived from Caleb's estranged sister. She'd read about the tree in the local paper, about the wedding. She wanted to reconnect. And she wasn't alone. She was bringing someone Caleb hadn't seen since before the leaves stopped turning. He stood on the porch the day they arrived, watching, waiting. The car door opened, and out stepped a young woman. Molly, not dead, not lost, just hidden, taken. The story wasn't over, not even close. She didn't look like a ghost. She didn't stumble out of the car in slow motion or run into his arms while orchestras swelled in the background. No, Molly stepped out like the world hadn't stopped spinning, like it had just shifted slightly and now expected everyone to adjust. She wore jeans, a green hoodie too thin for travel, and a look that said she hadn't come for pity. Caleb's knees went soft anyway. He hadn't seen her in 6 years. Not since the hospital, not since the machines, not since the moment the doctors turned solemn and the world blurred behind glassy tears. Not since the woman he once called sister said, "Let me take her for a bit, just until you can get back on your feet." But he never did, and she never came back. But here she was, 21 now, taller, harder in the eyes, and standing in the middle of his gravel driveway like nothing had passed but time. Delia stepped onto the porch beside him, her hand finding his instinctively. Sophie was still inside, unaware. Caleb didn't know what to say, so he didn't. He just walked toward the woman who used to fit in the crook of his arm like a secret. And when he stopped in front of her, she whispered, "I wasn't allowed to write." The words fractured something, not just inside him, but in the space around them, like the very air gave way. He reached for her, and this time, she let him. They stood there, father and daughter, one whole heart finally remembering how to beat again. No one clapped. The wind didn't pause. But somewhere inside Caleb's chest, the silence cracked, and something bloomed. Molly didn't stay long that night. Too much, too fast. She said she had classes, a job, a life she'd built in the absence, but she promised to come back. And this time he believed her. After the car disappeared down the road, Caleb walked back into the house and found Delia lighting the stove. Sophie was coloring quietly, humming something off-key and fearless. He sat down beside her, kissed the top of her head, and whispered, "You're going to have a big sister." Sophie blinked up at him, then smiled. Just once. Just enough. Days passed, and Molly did come back. First for dinner, then for weekends. Then she stayed a whole week and fixed a leaky faucet, without being asked. She met Delia's belly with wide eyes and unsure hands. She let Sophie braid her hair one afternoon, and one evening, she sat under the tree and asked Caleb if he remembered the night they used to count stars. "I never stopped," he said. She didn't answer, just leaned her head on his shoulder and let the night speak for them. Then came the summer storm. Thunder pealed across the sky, like it was ripping something open. The power flickered. The windows shook. Sophie clung to Miracle, who barked at every rumble. Delia lit candles, breath short, one hand on her belly. But it wasn't until she dropped a glass of water and gasped that Caleb understood. It was time. The baby was early. Too early. The roads were flooding. The phone lines down. The car stuck in mud that hadn't existed an hour ago. Delia tried to hide the pain, but her hands shook too hard, and her face lost all color. It was Molly who took charge. She grabbed towels, boiled water, steadied Delia's breathing with the calm of someone who'd had to grow up too fast. Caleb had delivered calves before, sure, but this was different. This was blood and shaking and fear that clenched so tight it choked the hope right out his chest, until a cry broke through. Small, furious, alive. Delia wept. Caleb collapsed to his knees. And Molly held the newborn in trembling hands until the storm passed. They named her Ella, a name that had no history, no weight, no ghosts. Just light, that storm changed more than the sky. Molly moved in for good. She started online classes from the kitchen table. She taught Sophie how to make pancakes shaped like rabbits. She sang to Ella at night when Delia needed sleep and Caleb needed to breathe. And one morning, without fanfare, she handed Caleb a letter. It was from the state, a formal acknowledgement, an apology, proof that she had never been legally released to his sister, that the adoption had been a lie, a forgery, that he had been her father all along. The guilt nearly drowned him. But Molly just said, "It's over now," and somehow that was enough. Autumn returned gently this time. The leaves didn't shrivel. They flamed, bright gold and fire red, like a promise kept. The apple tree bore fruit again, more than ever before. Sophie said it was because the tree was finally full of stories, she explained. And maybe she was right, because that winter, Caleb published a book, not about the storm, not about the custody battles, or the miracle of blooming trees, but about family, the kind you lose, the kind you find, the kind that shows up in the middle of the road with a suitcase and a truth too big to carry alone. They called it the porch tree. It sold a few hundred copies, but one ended up in the hands of a producer, and one morning a letter arrived from Los Angeles, an offer to turn their story into a film. Caleb read it 3 times, then handed it to Delia. "I think people need to believe that trees bloom again," she said softly. And so they said yes. But they didn't move. They didn't change their names or sell the house or turn it into something glossy. They kept the porch, the swing, the wind chime. They let the world come to them. Visitors trickled in, some with cameras, some with questions, some with nothing but a heavy heart and a hope that maybe, if they stood under the right tree, they'd remember what healing sounded like. Molly started a blog called Found on the Porch. Delia taught art therapy in the barn. Sophie sold her drawings online and signed every print with a smiley face made of stars. And Caleb? He planted another tree beside the first. Not because he needed another miracle, but because some stories deserve to begin again. Right now, maybe you're listening to this on your way home, or in bed, try not cry. Maybe you're standing in the middle of your own storm. If that's you, Remember this: the porch light is still on, the tree is still blooming, and someone somewhere is holding space just for you. If this story moved your soul the way it moved ours, please share it with someone who needs a quiet miracle. Like, comment, subscribe, because we're not done telling stories that remind us hope didn't leave. It just went quiet for a while. But now it's singing again.